So, Chidanand, let's bring you in. At this point, the headlines dominating the US media news cycle are, of course, the Epstein files. Trump got very angry with the CNN anchor when she tried to question him about it. Caitlin Collins getting a piece of his mind there. I'm imagining the India US deal not really the top of the news cycle in the US, but very much the top of the news cycle here. Also accompanied by its own share of domestic politics. Rahul Gandhi, the opposition, accusing the prime minister of having compromised BJP voters, obviously saying something very different and feeling like this is a very big hurrah moment for Modi. The fact is, we don't know the facts. There's a lot of detail we don't know. And I think Lisa is right that you may never get anybody to come forth and say, yeah, the Americans told us who to buy or not buy oil from, and we just said yes. But there is data. And the data does show you a 22% drop from November to December of 2025 in the purchase of Russian oil to its lowest ever level in 2 years. This is, analysis done by Reuters. What do you make of what clinched it? Do you agree with Lisa's analysis? Do you have theories of your own?
Yeah, thank you, Barkha, for having me. Yes, I agree with the 2 or 3 points that Lisa mentioned. The India-EU free trade agreement was definitely a factor. The point here is President Trump and many of his cabinet associates had said things like, President Trump himself had said India is a dead economy. It'll be a dead economy. Remember that? And then you had Howard Lutnick, who said India will say sorry, they'll come begging. And none of this happened, actually. If you really look at it, I think India's approach and response was very measured, very patient. This was a country which actually wore the US down. And in addition to India-EU trade deal, I believe the other factors were also the movement on the BRICS front, where India, Brazil, China moved to an alternate to setting up an alternate payment system, circumventing SWIFT. I think that's a major consideration. There are definite indications that there's a de-dollarization underway. It may take some time. So India was pretty unbending. There was also this factor of tariffs. At the end of the day, the tariffs hurt American people. This whole idea that somehow tariffs is bringing in billions and billions of dollars or trillions of dollars, like he claims. It's only partially true. Yes, there's, the US is collecting 50 billion in tariff revenue every month. But guess what? That tariff revenue is being paid by the American consumer, the American importer who passes it on to the American consumer. So that was a major factor because you're starting to feel the bite now. And there were many exceptions carved out. For instance, Brazil, which has 50% tariffs, but their main export, coffee, was exempted because, hey, the Americans can't do without, their morning, Starbucks cup. So there were several factors, but definitely the EU trade deal, the fact that India did not keel over and die, despite everything, it was very instructive. So there were 5 towns in India, cities that I monitored, to affect tariffs. For instance, Tirupur in Tamil Nadu, which is big textiles, 25% of all Indian textiles, mostly directed towards United States. Bhimavaram and Nellore in Andhra Pradesh, which is big shrimp sector. Surat for diamonds, jewelry. Ludhiana, Amritsar, for basmati rice. Guess what? These towns suffered, but there was not the mass employment. Nobody, threw themselves out, from buildings or threw themselves on railway tracks. The towns survived. And in fact, Indian exporters, thanks to the sanctions, went out and sought other markets and found other markets. There was more export of basmati to the Gulf, to, more export of textiles, shrimp. For the first time, we exported shrimp to China and Japan, right? So there was incredible resilience on part of India. And I think US eventually realized that it's futile, that you're basically, blocking out the market. And the ones who are suffering at the end of the day was the American consumer.
You spoke about India sort of being very patient and actually how India wore the US down. Bloomberg has some reporting in the last few hours that is talking about how Ajit Doval made, they say, an as yet unreported visit to America where he met with Rubio, and he conveyed to Rubio that India was willing to wait out. India was willing to wait out Trump's term. Now, of course, as you said, there is an economic hit, but the exporters weren't keeling over. I'm not sure what 3 more years of this may have done. I don't want to gloss over the fact that there were real economic consequences
Yeah.
eventually to those 50% tariffs. But this is another interesting piece of information that's coming out of Dovell's role as reported by Bloomberg.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there were several interlocutors. For instance, everyone's now focused on External Affairs Minister Jayashankar's meeting with Marco Rubio, but he also met Scott Bessent, who's the Treasury Secretary, yesterday. So there's obviously more going on. Like I said, the US is seriously concerned about de-dollarization. President Trump has been very open. He has actually said, if the BRICS countries, go on this de-dollarization, spree, we are going to sanction them and so on. So there are a lot of moving parts, but I do believe there's a combination of factors, and the US, I think, realized the futility of, these tariffs. And look, at the end of the day, particularly with regards to Russian oil, the fact is India is the second largest consumer of oil, and it places its oil bets very carefully. It's not just Russia giving cheap oil. India also buys from Saudi Arabia, from Iraq, it's bought in previously from Venezuela, from Nigeria, from UAE, gas from Qatar. And what basically happens is it's not a straight trade-off. You have to keep various, countries and people happy and give them the Indian market. One of the reasons India has had excellent relations with Gulf countries recently is you're keeping the sheikhs happy. You're buying from so many of them. And, that's how India has outmaneuvered Pakistan. So the Indian, just as President Trump uses the American market as bait, India uses its oil buying power as a weapon to.
Before we get into the geopolitics, this 500 billion figure, and I think you've spoken about it on our shows before. It's important to Trump to be able to put a big number out there, and he's taken this big number and he's put it out there. And again, we here in India, we don't have the breakdown, the fine print of what that $500 billion actually translates into.
Absolutely. I said it before. He loves big round numbers. It's 500 billion, 600 billion, 11 trillion, 20 trillion, and so on. It's never 475 billion or 265 billion. It's always, big round numbers. And look, so there's a lot of, posturing on both sides. But the fact is, I think we have the broad contours of an agreement. And even specifics, agriculture, for instance, this whole thing of, oh my God, we have to protect our agriculture. There are actually certain sectors where we need agricultural produce. We import. India produces vast amounts of lentils and pulses, but we still import because there's some years where we are short, and the government imports. We buy masoor dal from Canada, we buy arhar dal from Australia. So there are specific sectors. I actually call it a protein exchange. We need a protein bill. India is a protein deficient country and a carb excess country, right? So by all means, we can buy a ton of American protein that includes, tree nuts, for instance. We're already buying $1 billion worth of pistachios and almonds. California almonds are all over Delhi. You can probably add walnuts to it. And we need dal. We need dal, which we buy from Australia. We buy dal from Canada, from Mozambique, from Tanzania. So there's plenty of scope for agricultural imports. And for those who are into non-veg, the US has been trying to sell chicken legs for the longest time. So there's a ton of chicken legs you can buy. So absolutely, I think we need to protect basic agriculture, which means not buying, wheat or rice. We're self-sufficient in that. We in fact export that. I'm saying, yes, let's export carbs and import protein. That's what we need. And really speaking, I don't think we should be spooked by zero tariff, because why would you want to tariff, goods which help the Indian people, right? I see medical equipment in the list where, US is going to export. Yeah, sure. We need MRI machines. I mean, there's only one Indian company which has just started making MRI machines. We need MRI machines, CAT scan. These are things which we need to import at zero, tariff. Very good.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't, I'm not spooked by, oh my God, India has zero tariffs, and the US is imposing 18% tariff. Yeah, US is importing 18% tariff, which is hurting the American consumer. Right. And I went granular on this. I told you that the bag of 10-pound bag of basmati rice, which used to be $14.99, $16.99, is now $24.99. The company which is exporting basmati, they are not paying it. They are not paying the tariffs. It's the American importer paying it and billing me, right? I'm paying $24.99. So I think that we need to understand trade is complex, but by and large, I think this is a win-win for both sides. And I think India came out well out of this episode. They were very patient. They were very measured. I think we got the best deal. Yeah, sure, you can romanticize and say, oh, we used to have 2% and 4% tariffs, but that world is gone, right? This is a new world, and if it's the American president insists that the whole world has to pay taxes to access the American market, so be it. It's the American importer. Again, let me emphasize, it's the American importer and the American consumer who is paying, the tariffs, right?
Yeah.
Tariffs
Yeah.
are important to us only in the sense that we need to access the American market, and the fact that we have 18% tariff on, your basmati or whatever, places you on level with Pakistan, which has, 19% tariffs. At least, we don't get, outgunned on some of these fronts by neighboring countries. It's a equal.
Yeah.